So now that I have the battery disconnected, and before I dig into what I feel is going to be a long and involved job, I'm going to do one last thing, and that is install the throttle cables. So I've got Barnett throttle cables. It's not quite that simple though. So what I have here is an S&S Super E carburetor, and this bike originally came with a pre-CV carburetor. I don't know the exact name of that carburetor, but I know that the controls in 1996 were for CV carburetors, and they had a different bracket. So to put the right controls in that snap into this housing, which is what these are, these cables, they're going to require a different bracket. It's longer, it's spaced out longer. There's another option. You can get throttle cables that snap into the 96 housings that go onto the pre-CV controls from S&S. However, those were like 80 bucks a pop for like 140 bucks for the two cables. Whereas these two cables and this bracket, which is an S&S bracket, ended up being about 120 bucks. So I went that route. Little extra work, save a few bucks, and I have the actual correct cable. So should a cable fail somewhere out in the middle of the country, God willing it doesn't, but should it fail, a cable for a 1996 Tour Glide or Electra Glide will be a direct replacement once I swap this bracket. Throttle cables are a relatively easy job, but they're more involved than you might think. So I have to crack this housing loose, affix the master cylinder so that it's not touching the switch, remove the seat, and not quite remove, but lift the tank up out of the way so I can get behind here. While I'm at it, a few other things that need to get done to make this 100% is install all of the little pieces involved in the throttle stops. These things, when you don't have one, you realize just how often you might use it. Just to hold the RPM that little bit more while it's cold, or hold it on the highway to give you a sort of a rudimentary cruise control. And the other thing I want to do while I'm in this far is pop this really cool looking enricher in. I have this same enricher in the Fat Boy. The one that's in here now it's not an S&S original piece, but it's awkward to get to and it fights you to pull up, whereas this is just smooth. You just up and over, you're on the enricher, fire, reach in, and it's knurled, just boom, it's off. So let's get to it. All right. Once the tank's unbolted, just one through bolt here and two little ones, we can lift it up, prop it out of the way, and then run our cables. I'm gonna start with running the idle cable. So I know it's got to go through here and then through a retaining clamp. So grab that and then run it more or less where it needs to go. And it's going to end up in here. But not for now. For now, I want to get it connected to the carburetor along with the throttle cable. The throttle cable runs through in much the same manner. And you know, relatively easy. It's easy to do this job right. I guess it's easy to do it wrong too. You know, not run the cable where it's supposed to run, but we're not going to do that. We're going to run the cables correctly, and the main difference you'll see, throttle cable has no spring, idle cable has a spring. So I guess it was law at some point where they had to run an idle cable, and it had to be spring loaded to make sure to pull the carburetor back to idle. It's kind of weird that it applies to motorcycles, because cars don't have that, or never had that. Everything's gone to, you know, drive-by-wire now, which to me is even bigger of a concern, because we're simply trusting on the computer and sensors to make the right decisions for us. But that's a whole different conversation. For now, I got to get these cables on. Maybe pull this off to give me a little bit more room. No, still not a fan. I get it. It's iconic, especially on the older motorcycles, but still not a fan. And I won't say it's a bad design. I actually think the design is pretty good. Just not my taste. But it also has that correct look. So there's that. So once you get the idle cable hooked up, drop the spring inside, and I will just pull on this from the other end of the cable and make sure we're there. We're seated. All right, throttle cable, change this enricher, and I can button this back together. The cables are actually super easy to catch if you don't have any tension on them. And then just drop them in place, and they're there. Now, I left out one part. The cables are now in place, hooked up. I've got to change this bracket. You could have done it beforehand, probably should have done it beforehand, but I didn't. So I'm going to do it now. Long screwdrivers help. That's pretty straightforward. It's still easy either way to change these cables, to change the bracket. As long as this end of the cable is not hooked up, you can slack them enough to swap the bracket, and it's a non-issue really. New bracket, new screw, no new problems. I don't know, we'll see. Like I said, should just pop together. I mean, maybe I'm being optimistic. I don't know. I try to be optimistic, but you know, sometimes things don't work out exactly as you had predicted. Then again, sometimes you can plan everything to a T and it still doesn't work out exactly as predicted. So who's right and who's wrong? Makes you wonder. In this case, I've got the bracket on and the cables are still in place. Back to just snugging them down a little bit through the other end of the cable. Same thing with this one. Drop the spring in. I'm going to pull the other end of the cable and pull that one in. And well, I wasn't really paying attention, but the length of the cable that's exposed is considerably shorter now. And this is what's meant to work with these controls. So we have them in, but I'm not going to button anything up just yet until I get these connected to the controls and make sure that they're routed correctly, not being pinched, zip tied if they got to be zip tied, and go from there. Let's not forget anything else while I'm here is swapping out this enricher. Now, like I said, this one, it does work, but it fights you a little bit. It fights you, I guess the spring's too tight or the clearance is too, when you try to get it up over that last bit, you know, it'll go to the first stage, second stage, useless essentially. But when you try to get it to full enrichment, it fights you. Whereas the new one is super slick, super smooth, also looks a whole lot better. It just pick up and you're done. So that's what we're going with on this one. And they did a great job, I have to say, S&S, for how they designed this carburetor. I mean, it's, I can't repeat myself enough, super simple. And that's kind of what you want. You know, I appreciate the simplicity of the whole design. I mean, that's it. It's in, it's enriched, it's in. You're ready to go. Ready to pop this off. And like I said earlier, with, you know, replacing the master cylinders, shove something in there, anything. Here's a wire tie. Just pull it back, shove it in there. This way it doesn't close. And then as long as it doesn't close, you should be able to pull this apart. There you go. This out of the way, and I can run the cables. So we have throttle and idle, right? Throttle just pulls on the throttle cable, and that'll be in this direction. And these cables literally just pop into place. So throttle cable pops in, and idle cable pops in. You know, I get it if you don't trust it, because I didn't really for a while, but they really do work good. And removal is just as easy. Just pull it down. And I removed it because I want to run it so it's not binding. Here we are. Cables are almost in. Let's grease this thing up. One last thing that has to go in before anything else gets pulled apart is the throttle stop. And there's a tiny little clip that goes in and retains that from falling out, because it will fall out. I guarantee you it'll fall out, because I don't have one on the Fat Boy. It fell out. So you get this thing threaded in here until the spring stops, and then delicately attempt to not lose the tiny C-clip that I just lost. But I have spares. It's not a C-clip, it's actually an E-clip, but it's small. So you've got to be real careful trying to get this thing in there. Once it's in, you can back the throttle stop out, and this will go up against the housing. Ain't gonna go anywhere. But getting it in there, different story. So what I have is a slightly magnetic pick, and I'm gonna just try and get it in there. If I can just get it in place, I can clip it in with pretty much anything. But it's just a matter of getting it in place. Once it's in, there's a shoe that goes in and clips into the stop, keeps it from going anywhere. And that is what you can use to apply some pressure to your throttle handle. Help, like I said, help with cold starts, help with idles, help with maybe giving your wrist a break. But it's that simple, it's that stupid, but if you don't have it, you realize just how important it is. Next thing that was important to learn about Harleys, I guess, is these ferrules. So the cables come through with just a ball end that don't really go anywhere. But they use these ferrules that you install like this, right? And that ball end goes into it, into the ferrule. And now that is what goes into the throttle and allows your grip to grab the cable. I mean, pretty straightforward, but if you don't know, they say, right? Tying your shoes is easy once you know. Well, I didn't know this at one point, and it was a pain in the ass. Now I know, and it's relatively simple. It makes sense now. FYI, these things do wear out, and they are readily available in packs of more than just one. But to Barnett's credit, they do come with the cables. So that's a good thing to know. That's pretty much it. Once you get them installed, adjust them. A little bit of lube in and around here because it's aluminum on aluminum, but it's just that simple. You know, there you go. It's, I mean, again, a ton of slack. It's not supposed to have because it's not adjusted, but pretty straightforward. And we have throttles again. That's pretty much it. Once it's all lubed up, get it back in place with that little bit of play, allow the grip to work, snug up the master cylinder, snug up the controls, and then adjust the cables. Pretty simple, straightforward, but something that is, to some people at least, intimidating, or, well, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I can't tell you how many bikes I've ridden, test ridden for someone, and you could instantly feel that the cables are either out of whack or just old and crusty and not lubricated. Maybe it's not that they're afraid. Maybe it's that people are not lubricating cables like they should. I don't know. Don't know what it is. Whatever it is, it should be resolved, because a good, smooth feeling throttle, I mean, there's nothing like that, you know? I mean, this is just nice. The cables that were on here were so crusty and rusty and full of gunk. They've been sitting for 20 years, you'd expect that. But you always sat there and would hope, would it hang up? Is it gonna snap? You know, it didn't give you that confidence. This does. All right, I'll adjust it, throw this thing back together, and I think that'll be it. And now that the battery is disconnected, let's dive into the primary. So with this, I think we are pretty much ready to run, which is exciting. We got new controls, we got brakes to the blade, we have throttle cables. What we don't have is a primary that isn't leaking, and anyone that may have been paying attention, this is what I got. This is what I'm gonna dig into. I'm gonna pull this whole thing apart. Supposedly this has every seal. I hope it has every seal. Wish me luck that it has every seal. And yep, I'm gonna pull it apart and see if I can seal that thing up. And I wanna get this thing back on the road. We'll find out. But on that note, I'm gonna say thank you again for watching and the comments. I'm gonna stress again and again and again how much I've learned just interacting with everyone in the comments. And I appreciate everyone's experience on these older bikes. So please, please keep it up. And until the next time, good night.